Hi, this is Paul, and this is Rough Draft for Sunday, where I run through the current version of my Sunday sermon. As always, this is a rough draft. The sermon is subject to change between now and Sunday. If you want to see the final version, Rick and I continue to try to improve the sound of the recordings from the Sunday service, but you can find that on the church channel. It's not on this channel. We've been looking at the Apostle Paul's silent years, and I explained those in last week's sermon. And in the slide last week, I noted that in Paul we have a reunion of heaven and earth that becomes a bridge that the church reproduces. The Christian church has continued to hop cultures as it has gone through time, and Christianity has a rather unique capacity to do that sort of culture hopping. A lot of this was built into Paul's biography himself. This, a quote from Ben Witherington's Conflict and Community in Corinth, a socio-rhetorical commentary on 1st and 2nd Corinthians. Paul is the product of the confluence of three cultural orientations: Jewish, Hellenistic Greek, and Roman. It is easy to see why he should be so influenced by all three, since the evidence suggests that he was a Roman citizen, like his parents before him, that he was born in one of the centers of Hellenistic culture, that is, in the city of Tarsus in Asia Minor, and that he was a child of Orthodox Jews, who took and sent him to Jerusalem at an early age to study at the feet of the notable teacher Gamaliel and to become himself a Pharisaic teacher. But Paul had his Damascus Road experience, and Ananias was sent. In Damascus there was a disciple named Ananias. The Lord called him in a vision. "Ananias." "Yes, Lord," he answered. The Lord told him, "Go to the house of Judas on Straight Street and ask for a man from Tarsus named Saul, for he is praying. In a vision he has seen a man named Ananias come and place his hands on him to restore his sight." "Lord," Ananias answered, "I have heard many reports about this man, all the harm that he has done to your holy people in Jerusalem. And he has come here with authority from the chief priests to arrest all who call on your name." But the Lord said to Ananias, "Go. This man is my chosen instrument to proclaim my name to the Gentiles and their kings and to the people of Israel. I will show him how much he must suffer in my name." Now, for some of you, that's a strange thing for the Lord to say to Ananias and to be pointed out here in the book of Acts about Paul's life. As we said last week, sort of heaven and earth meet in his story. He has direct personal relationship with Christ through visions, revelations, etc. He incorporates these visions into the picture from the Hebrew scriptures he has lived with all his life. He does this in a cosmopolitan Roman world where he has to apply this to everyday life of everyday people, Jews, God-fearers, and Gentiles. Now, we noted that there are these silent years between his Damascus Road conversion, his Damascus Road experience, and then where Luke picks up the story in the book of Acts when Barnabas goes and says, "I'll go find Paul, and we will start to work in Antioch," where we hear a whole bunch of Gentiles are now calling themselves Christians and meeting together. Now, long after this, we're going to have Paul going to the city of Corinth, which Luke will talk about. And we're going to find clues about the silent years in Paul's what in the New Testament is 2 Corinthians, his second letter to the church at Corinth. But I want us to know a little bit about the city and the context and the letter in order to understand why he says what he says and the impact of Christ's suffering and, in fact, our suffering in the Christian life. At the time of Paul's three visits from AD 50 to 56, Corinth was officially a Roman city. So, to the best of our knowledge, Paul made three visits to the church at Corinth. Ancient Corinth, symbolized by the remains of the Doric column temple of Apollo, rivaled Athens for supremacy as a Greek city-state and maritime power during the pre-classical and classical eras from the 6th to the 4th century BC. During the 2nd century BC, however, Corinth, with other states in the Peloponnese, sought protection from the invading Romans through a membership in the Achaean League, but to no avail. In 146 BC, a Roman army led by Mummius destroyed the city and killed or enslaved the population, causing the extinction, according to Cicero, of the light of all Greece. In 44 BC, almost a century before Paul's arrival, Julius Caesar, recognizing Corinth's strategic location, directed the creation of a Roman colony on the rundown site of the ancient city. It was called Colonia Laus Iulia Corinthiensis in his honor, and the process of repopulation had begun. Unlike other colonies, New Corinth was not settled with Roman army veterans, but with poorer Romans, many of whom were libertini, freed slaves, as well as people from the eastern Mediterranean, Syrians, Egyptians, and Jews, who would have some familiarity with Koine Greek. The offense to other Greeks of the resettlement of Corinth with such inhabitants may be noted in the rather exaggerated remarks of a contemporary poet. "What inhabitants, O luckless city, hast thou received, and in place of whom? Alas for the great calamity of Greece, wholly abandoned to such a crowd of scoundrelly slaves." Now, already in that poem, and by the story of the city, you can see a lot of tension between the values of the Greeks and the values of the Romans. This Corinth had been a proud Greek city-state, rivaling Athens, and now it is filled with a bunch of freed slaves, who many of the other Greeks considered not the right kind of people to take up and create a city in such a lofty place. The Apostle Paul came alone to Corinth from Athens in the autumn of AD 50. His assistants, Timothy and Silvanus, who were still occupied with the churches in Macedonia, arrived sometime later. Paul immediately attached himself to Aquila and Priscilla, who, along with other Jews, had been expelled from Rome in AD 49 by the decree of the Emperor Claudius. He worked with them as a tent maker, a trade they shared, and he lived with them. It is probable, but not certain, that Aquila and Priscilla were already believers when they came to Corinth, and that they, with Paul, formed the nucleus of an ecclesia, or a church, in that city. They appeared to have created a house church in other places as well. This congregation drew a number of its members from the urban elite of the wealthy Greco-Roman Corinth, where patron-client relationships were customary. E.A. Judge has drawn attention to a social phenomenon that he calls status, a position of power arising from wealth rather than an official position or rank. Rank was critically important in terms of the he uses, it's a little frustrating that he uses status as in such a technical term here, because I don't know what other English word we're going to use for what we might call status. Patronage occurred not only for those who held political appointment or rank, but also at a domestic and social level from men and women of wealth or status. It was quite common for citizens, and perhaps people listening in the UK have a better understanding of this because, of course, the stratifications of class in the UK and nobility is quite different from what we have in America, where often status comes from wealth because we're a more egalitarian society. It is quite common for citizens of rank and status to provide hospitality and financial benefits to visiting rhetoricians who might come to Corinth to participate in poetry reading and public speaking competition at the Isthmian Games held every 2 years, but doubtless at other times as well. That's going to be important in terms of Paul's challenging of the so-called super apostles. Refusing to accept such patronage by insisting on working at a menial trade to support himself, Paul identified with the lower orders. This non-acceptance represented an unresolved tension between Paul and the Corinthians. His studied refusal to exercise the technique of the rhetoricians while at Corinth was also a point of serious criticism. Paul's rejection of patronage and his unwillingness to fulfill their expectations of a public speaker were, according to Judge, in deliberate repudiation of patronage based on status. He argued that while Paul called for subordination to those with rank, that is, to those who held an official position, whether in society or the church, he rejected the conventions associated with status. So, again, our focus is going to be on the silent years, but we have this record from the years in which he was writing and the conflict from those years that shows us what he learned in the silent years and how he learned it. So Paul came to Corinth in about 50 AD, and he left in about 52 AD, and after he left, relations began to sour. Apollos, an impressive Christian preacher, some people try to ascribe the book of Hebrews to Apollos, came through Corinth and wowed the church. Cephas, or Peter, who was in some ways the head of the apostles, came through and also wowed the church. And then, as we saw via this patronage system, other what Paul calls sometimes false apostles or super apostles came through, impressing some of the wealthy of the growing church and speaking against Paul. Now, there was tension in the very early church over this question of how are Gentiles enfolded into the story of Israel? What must they pass through in order to be included in this new and old people of God? And these tensions are in the book of Galatians. These tensions are in Corinth, but they tend to be in different ways because now I'm going to use regard or status, not in the sense that E.A. judges, particularly pertaining to wealth, but generally status among human beings, especially in a religious community. Because how does the church measure status? Status happens in churches. Leadership and the emergence of leadership requires that certain people be held in higher esteem, but for what qualities? And actually, when it comes to religious communities of many kinds, the same menu of options tends to hold. In Jewish culture, it was keeping of the Torah, when someone shows serious sacrifice and obedience and disciplines according to the values of the community. And so one of the options was, well, you can become a great Christian by keeping the law, and maybe all these lower status Christians maybe just are baptized and included in the church, but if you take on the dietary rules and you take on the commandments of the Torah, then you will have greater status in the community. And Paul deals with that in the book of Galatians. The church in Corinth had a lot of visions. Today we might think of them as a charismatic church in some ways. And so impressive visions, or at least testimony to impressive visions, miracles, spiritual power. This would have been the kind of status that many in the broader pagan society would have recognized as, oh, there's a super Christian. Miracles follow him or her. The other is socio-political culture, and this gets into more status, as E.A. Judge was talking about, influence, wealth, popularity. And so, well, how do you know who to follow? You look for status and who everybody else is looking to for leadership. Now, the deconstruction and the way Christianity deals with these are differentiated from a lot of the worldview rivals that are around it. And this is what Paul writes about, because he's differentiating himself from these false apostles or super apostles. Now, he's going to be boasting and speaking as a fool, and those have specific assumptions nested in the culture, because in Roman society, you boasted about yourself. That's what you did. Not so much in Jewish society. And so he's playing off that. Also, often the fool in Greek plays would be someone who would sort of tell the unvarnished truth as everyone else was sort of speaking around things. You might have similar things in American literary and movie traditions as well. The fool just blurts out the truth when everybody else is beating around the bush, let's say. Was it a sin for me to lower myself in order to elevate you by preaching the gospel of God to you free of charge? This is his refusal to participate in the patronage system. I robbed other churches by receiving support from them so as to serve you. And when I was with you and needed something, I was not a burden to anyone, for the brothers who came from Macedonia supplied what I needed. I have kept myself from being a burden to you in any way and will continue to do so. In other words, he is not willing to allow them to have patronage over him. He is going to stay free of that because he wants to make a point. And later on, when we take a look at 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians, we can see some of the issues that were at play, such as his criticism of the way that they handled what would become the Lord's Supper. As surely as the truth of Christ is in me, nobody in the regions of Achaia will stop this boasting of mine. Why? Because I do not love you? God knows I do. I will keep on doing what I'm doing. Now, there's a fair bit of irony and mockery to shame them in this letter. I will keep on doing what I am doing in order to cut the ground from under those who want an opportunity to be considered equal with us in the things they boast about. For such people are false apostles, deceitful workers, masquerading as apostles of Christ. And no wonder, for Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. Paul could say some pretty sharp things. It is not surprising, then, if his servants also masquerade as servants of righteousness. Their end will be what their actions deserve. I repeat, let no one take me for a fool, but if you do, then tolerate me just as you would a fool, so that I may do a little boasting. In this self-confident boasting, I am not talking as the Lord would, but as a fool. Since many are boasting in the way the world does, I too will boast. You gladly put up with fools, since you are so wise. And here, again, this is very cutting. In fact, you even put up with anyone who enslaves you, or exploits you, or takes advantage of you, or puts on airs, or slaps you in the face. This is what he's saying these false apostles are doing, and they're eating it up. To my shame, I admit that we were too weak for that. Whatever anyone else, because they had charged that he was weak. Whatever anyone else dares to boast about, I am speaking as a fool. I also dare to boast about. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they Abraham's descendants? So am I. Are they servants of Christ? I am out of my mind to talk like this. I am more. I have worked much harder, been imprisoned more frequently, been flogged more severely, and been exposed to death again and again. Now, many scholars have looked at this passage and counted up all of these incidences in the book of Acts and noted a good many of these must have come during the silent years. A good many of these, having come in the silent years, gives us an indication that Paul not only worked with his hands, but already began this process of working to evangelize the God-fearing and Gentile peoples of the Roman Empire, and paid dearly for it even before he sort of pops up again in the book of Acts when he's going to go to Antioch. 5 times I have received from the Jews the 40 lashes plus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was pelted with stones. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I have been constantly on the move. I have been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from my fellow Jews, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, and in danger from false believers. I have labored and toiled and have gone without sleep. I have known hunger and thirst and have gone without food. I have been cold and naked. Besides everything else, I face daily the pressure of my concern for all the churches. This is who he says how he has lived. And this is in complete distinction from his life before the Damascus Road, where he enjoyed the favor of his people and the support of the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem and quite likely would have led a very peaceful, affluent life. But instead, this is the life he chose, and this is the life he lived. And now basically what he's saying to the church at Corinth is, whatever measure you use, except for the measure you're most in favor of, which is wealth and status, I excel these people that you are listening to in place of me. What we have of Paul in Acts by Luke is only a fraction of what he recounts here. This means that in his silent years, not only was he working things out in his mind, but he was also suffering in his body. Remember what Jesus said to Ananias? I will show him how much he must suffer for my name. Is suffering an integral part of the Christian life? What does it mean that our master was a man of sorrows? Most religion is about how to have success in life. You sacrifice to universe or being or the gods in order to gain favor and success, and your status with the gods is directly seen by your status in the world. That's how karma works. That's how Job's friends saw it. Not so with Christ. What stands at the center of the Christian religion? Jesus is not acceptable as a Messiah to many because he appears to lose. We like our Messiahs uncrucified. Paul has this to say. Who is weak? And I do not feel weak? Who is led into sin? And I do not inwardly burn? If I must boast, I will boast of the things that show my weakness. The God and Father of the Lord Jesus, who is to be praised forever, knows that I am not lying. In Damascus, the governor under King Aretas had the city of the Damascenes guarded in order to arrest me, but I was lowered in a basket in a wall, from a window in the wall, and slipped through his hands. Now, this kind of boasting would be deeply ironic because for a Roman soldier, it would have been a mark of passage to be able to scale a wall. Now, Paul shamefully has to be lowered, a rite of passage to scale a wall. Paul shamefully has to be lowered in a basket down a wall. I must go on boasting, although there is nothing to be gained. I will go on to visions and revelations from the Lord. I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago was caught up to the third heaven. Whether it was in body or out of body, I do not know. God knows. He's clearly talking about himself. And I know that this man, whether in body or apart from his body, I do not know, but God knows, was caught up to paradise and heard inexpressible things, things that no one is permitted to tell. I will boast about a man like that, but I will not boast about myself, except about my weaknesses. Even if I should choose to boast, I would not be a fool, because I would be speaking the truth. But I refrain so no one will think more of me than is warranted by what I do or say, or because of these surpassingly great revelations. Therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. What is he doing? He is reinforcing what he believes the gospel is and how it should be lived, and noting that the Corinthians are in fact not living the way they should. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. I have made a fool of myself, but you drove me to it. I ought to have been commended by you, for I am not in the least inferior to the so-called super-apostles, even though I am nothing. I persevered in demonstrating among you the marks of a true apostle, including signs, wonders, and miracles. How were you inferior to the other churches, except that I was never a burden to you? Forgive me this wrong. Now I am ready to visit you a third time, and I will not be a burden to you, because what I want is not your possessions, but you. And this is the point that he makes. These super apostles, they want you for the money. They are false suitors, false lovers. I, Paul, he says, I don't want your money. I don't want the status. I just want you. After all, children should not save up for their parents, but parents for their children. And Paul is saying, I am your parent. Myself, Aquila, and Priscilla, we birthed the church. I am here pouring myself out for you. This is the way of Christ. What kind of a world is this? Well, Rome destroys Corinth. It's a new city, sort of like Vegas. Winners like winning. Winning by moral fiber or obedience to the law, winning the charismatic Olympics by having greater visions and greater miracles and greater spiritual demonstrations than others, winning by wealth, power, and fame. Does this kind of winning really make a new world? Or does this kind of winning really just perpetuate the world that this kind of winning always gives? In the new Bachelorette, there was a moment this week of climax where everyone in the house is talking against this guy, and he's there for the wrong reasons. He wants to up his followership on Instagram. He wants to be the new bachelor. And she summarily excused him. Why? Because we all want to be wanted for us. Not our looks, not our beauty, not our money, not our status, not our fame. We want to be loved for us, even if we're not exactly sure what us is. So that dramatic climax in Paul's speech, I don't want your stuff. I want you. This is Christ's word to us. Therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. In the night our Lord was betrayed, he took bread and broke it, and said, this is my body, given for you. He took the cup and said, this is a new covenant in my blood. Whenever you drink this, remember me. When we are weak, then he is strong.